Good morning, and thank you everybody for coming today. My name is Ryan Bates. I'm the director of End Gun Violence Michigan. We are a coalition of 50 parent, teacher, student, and faith organizations who came together after the Oxford and MSU shootings to say we should no longer have to live in fear, and we're not going to anymore. 1,300 Michiganders every year lose their lives to gun violence in every community. Whether it's the veteran, we lose to suicide. Whether it's the 150 victims of domestic violence who are killed with a gun by someone who was supposed to love them. Whether it's mass shootings in our schools or a child who is killed in a gun accident because a parent left their firearm unsecure. Every single one of these deaths is preventable, and we are going to stop them. Just last week, gunfire erupted outside of Dick's Sporting Goods at the Meridian Mall here in Lansing. We should not have to live like this, where a trip to the mall is taking your life in your hands. It's like going to a war zone. We should not have to live like this anymore, and we're not going to. The only question is, do we have the political will to make the change and stand up to the gun industry and the NRA? The good news is that here in Michigan, over the past several years, we've built that political will. We have, in the last session, a dozen new laws, policies, and appropriations that are saving lives today. You can clap that. You can applaud that. Michigan has gone from not passing a single gun law in 40 years and being a failure on the issue of gun violence to being a national leader, thanks to the courage of the people in this room. Parents, teachers, students, people of faith, and elected officials who came together and said, our lives, the lives of our children, matter more than the gun industry's profits. We're going to stand up, we're going to fight back, and we're going to win. So, the one question I want to answer to frame things up before we hand things over to our legislators here who are going to talk about some very important legislation to keep up this momentum is why it's like this. Why do we have this uniquely American crisis of gun violence? The answer, my friends, is the gun industry. They are making money off of this crisis. Every time one of our children is buried in the ground, they put money in their pockets. They use that money to hire slick lobbyists, to pay off politicians, to fund primary challengers if anyone steps out of line. We have so much gun violence because the gun industry profits from it, and they use that money to rig the political system. That's why guns are now the number one cause of death for children in this country. Well, I'm proud today to be standing here not only with organizers and activists and leaders and parents and students, but with politicians who cannot be bought by the gun industry, who are here today, who are here to champion a series of laws to hold the gun industry accountable, to protect our communities, and to protect our children. I want to recognize Representative McDonald's, Representative Burns, Representative Reinigans, Representatives Weiss, Representatives Hoskins, Morgan, Hope, Representative Miller, Representatives Morgan and Foreman and Long John, who will speak in a moment, Representatives Rogers, O'Neill, and McKinney, who are all here because they're fighting to save your lives. So now we need to keep up this momentum, and now I'm going to turn things over to Rep. Hope, who's going to talk about how we hold gun dealers accountable and stop the flow of these guns into our communities.
Ryan's a little bit taller than I am. He brought the fire this morning too. Thank you, Ryan.
Hold on. The sound is off. light's not coming on.
The light's not coming on. So unplug it.
Does that mean it's off? It doesn't amplify. It's just.
I don't need to be amplified. I'm fired up enough as it is. I can
Try talking into it. Maybe it's just the light coming on.
There you go.
Sounds.
Like
Are you guys
Testing 1, 2.
No, no sound.
No sound?
No sound.
No?
Hit the button again. Try again. Just to see if that made a difference.
Sometimes you have to change the channel. It'll just be really quiet, so you can check the channel. We have an extra battery back there too. Just switch channel.
We have our own hearing aid. I was just gonna say, they all have their.
Is it back?
I don't know. I saw it move. I don't know if it's on.
Testing.
No.
Here, change this battery out. Thank you, everybody, for being awfully patient here.
Thank you guys.
Okay. We were just waiting for Colin to get here.
Thanks. You know, Franklin was
There you go. Got it.
Colin.
We good?
Try it.
Testing. One,
Did it
2, 3.
go
Testing.
Push the button.
Testing.
No,
Is
push
it
that
going
button
green
again.
here?
No,
It's not fully
it hasn't
plugged.
been green.
I'm hearing a click, but then I
Yeah.
don't hear the.
Still not going green. That battery.
Check it now.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
I've heard of good trouble, but never good technical.
Yes. Wait, that one. Testing. 1, 2, 3. No, it's the
I'm
button.
hearing clicks, but you're not getting it.
Just change the battery again because that one's completely dead. That's the first one, right?
Yeah.
This one's totally dead. I mean, the green button's not even coming on. Otherwise, we're just gonna have to talk real loud.
Oh, maybe I put
We'll be real quiet.
Wait, try it again.
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Wait, it's back. It's back.
Oh, wait, it is back.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Finally.
Okay. Okay.
You got it.
All right. You're not giving up.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm Kara Hope, and I'm state representative for the 74th House District, which is South Lansing and Delhi Township. And I'm here to talk about an important piece of legislation to rein in one part of the industry that Ryan mentioned, which is gun sellers. Even though it's illegal for those with a felony record to have any sort of gun, the majority of violent crime is committed by repeat offenders. So if the shooters aren't allowed to purchase guns legally, where are the guns coming from? Well, according to the Brady campaign, 90% of guns used in crime come from 5% of the dealers. I want to repeat that. 90% of guns used in crime come from 5% of gun dealers. There are no federal laws requiring gun stores to undertake any measures to secure their inventory from theft or loss. And for this reason, many gun dealers aren't taking the proper measures to prevent this from happening. I'll lay some stats on you. In 2022, over 17,000 firearms were reported lost or stolen by federally licensed firearms sellers. That's 45 guns per day, moving from the legal market to the black market. Between 2017 and 2021, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms found that 17% of gun trafficking investigations, or about 1,400 plus, involved thefts from licensed gun sellers. Also, according to the ATF, states without gun dealer licensing lose about 1.6 times more guns to burglary and 9 times more to robberies. And in states without gun dealer licensing, they have 3.6 times more guns stolen per 100,000 people. I know stats can be kind of difficult to take in, but the upshot here is that due to lax dealer security and the lack of enforcement, there's a small number of gun dealers that are knowingly selling guns to gun traffickers or straw purchasers. A trafficker is someone who purchases guns and then resells them on the street illegally. A straw purchaser has a clean criminal record and purchases a gun on behalf of someone who is not allowed to have one legally. If someone comes into your store every week to buy cheap handguns, you should know something is going on. It's not a forgetful buyer or an irresponsible buyer. Well, they are irresponsible, but not in that way. They're selling their guns on the street and fueling crime in our cities. Traffickers and straw purchasers are the reason that it's so easy for someone with a criminal record to get a gun here in Lansing, Detroit, or anywhere in Michigan. And sometimes sellers' records just happen to go missing or outright falsified. So when the police show up and ask about tracing a gun, they can't help. That's why the bad guys keep going back to the same 5% of gun stores. Everyone knows this is happening. The ATF and local police departments have the data. But the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has systematically been starved of the resources to do anything about it. Most gun stores only get federally inspected once every 10 years, if that. Once every 10 years. And most of the time, if a problem is found, the gun dealer gets a bunch of warnings before they lose their federal license. For example, an example from Michigan, a gun dealer in Newaygo County got cited 14 different times before the ATF took their federal firearms license. They were selling without background checks. They were selling to minors, and they didn't care. Why are we giving gun dealers this many second chances when lives are on the line? If a dealer doesn't take the great responsibility of life and death seriously, then they should not be in the business of selling firearms, period. We should not have to wait for the ATF. That's why my bill gives the state of Michigan the power to shut down corrupt or negligent gun dealers. This bill creates a license that is a requirement for doing business in Michigan, and it gives our law enforcement the ability at the state level to inspect these dealers and revoke the license of those who aren't following the law. If a gun dealer knows or should have known that they are selling to a gun trafficker or a straw purchaser, we will shut them down. We can't wait for justice. We can't wait for safety. We can't wait for the federal government, especially not now. We need the power to save lives here and now. And I'll be working with my colleagues, people in this room, and people who weren't able to make it today, to build support for this bill, and I hope to make progress over the coming session. I've worked on this bill for, I think, my whole time in the legislature now. It feels like my whole life. And I'm looking forward to keeping the momentum that Ryan spoke about going, and now I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Representative Longjohn.
Thank you, Representative Hope. Thanks for everybody who's here paying attention to this important issue. I'm State Representative Matt Longjohn from Portage, Texas Township, and Oshimo Township in Kalamazoo County. I'm also the only physician in the legislature and a public health professional who spent 25 years working in the field of gun violence prevention, a published author who's worked in this field for a long time, and It's an honor to be standing with my colleagues who advanced so many great pieces of legislation in the last session, and it's a privilege to be with so many other people who've dedicated so much of their lives to helping prevent gun injury and gun death amongst our population. Anyone who has been around gun violence knows where they were and what they were doing when they first came face to face with it. For me, that was just over 30 years ago when I was a 23-year-old first-year medical student at Tulane University down in New Orleans, which was the murder capital of the United States in the early 90s. As a first-year med student, I was working to figure out where I could find clinical experiences, not just learning from books, and volunteered in the emergency department in the first month or two of my med school career. And that's the first time I encountered gun violence face to face. A 13-year-old boy was brought into the emergency room with an entrance wound in his forehead. The bullet rattled around within his skull and left that young man disabled for the rest of his life. Had a huge impact on me. Later that year, still a first-year med student, I was riding on an ambulance that responded to a mass casualty shooting. I can vividly recall being terrified, walking between the ambulance and the scene of the crime, where shell casings were soaking in blood in puddles on the floor. One of my classmates in med school, just a month later, was on a similar call with EMTs and arrived on the scene, and the shooter was still present. And that med student and the EMTs that arrived were literally chased around the ambulance by a gun-wielding perpetrator of violence. These are just some of the experiences that I had in medical education, medical training and practice in New Orleans and Chicago that led me to dedicate a big part of my life to gun violence prevention. Healthcare providers, healthcare workers in the emergency department and first responders everywhere see gun violence early in their careers, often, and throughout their careers. It's often traumatizing to those providers and frequently inspires folks like me to see gun violence prevention as a public health issue and to address it through our careers in research, practice, and advocacy. My work in gun violence prevention started in earnest about 25 years ago when I was working with the 14 largest medical societies in the United States to conduct policy research into what physicians should be doing in emergency departments, what medical professionals should recognize as the standard of care in gun violence prevention, and how to communicate our findings and the importance of this work to the public. That work has taken many shapes over the past quarter century, with renewed efforts underway, it seems, with every high-profile shooting or school shooting. But the epidemic has become endemic, and we can't just respond when the lights are on and the cameras are rolling. We have to recognize this as a chronic issue, and we have to evolve with the times. We have to recognize changing trends in data and respond accordingly. In 2025, we need to prioritize one of the most insidious elements of this industry, ghost guns. In Michigan, we've made tremendous progress making sure that guns don't end up in dangerous hands. We've passed things like universal background checks to ensure that every gun sale is legitimate. Ghost guns totally undermine all of that progress. A ghost gun, for those of you who don't know, is a firearm that can be manufactured on a 3D printer. They aren't serialized, they're untraceable, they are transferred between parties with no records, and are then therefore very often involved in illegal gun sales. These firearms, there aren't firearm sales records for ghost guns, so law enforcement has no idea where they come from or where they might be trafficked next. They're often sold anonymously online, so anyone can buy them without a background check. This includes minors. This includes domestic abusers. This includes people with dangerous criminal records who have otherwise been prohibited from gun ownership. These kits can be put together with just a few screws, and you can have a fully functioning firearm. This is just the latest evolution in gun violence, and we need to respond to this emerging aspect of the epidemic accordingly. To address ghost guns, we must first understand their role in the overarching epidemic of gun violence, which we often talk about as a single epidemic, but it's more nuanced than that. Among the nearly 50,000 people who die in the United States by gun every year, the majority of deaths are by suicide. It turns out that long guns, like shotguns or rifles, are more often used in suicide than any other form in the other forms of gun violence. This is especially true in rural areas, where older white men, like my great-grandfather, die by suicide at rates that are 5 times higher than the national average. Handguns, on the other hand, are used in the vast majority of homicides. Automatic weapons, assault weapons, are obviously the big problem that we see in mass casualty events, school shootings. But my point is that all guns are different and tied to different aspects and trends of the gun violence epidemic. The type of gun used in gun violence is an important factor to consider when responding to the epidemic. And we need to tailor our policy approaches to the various aspects of the epidemic if we're going to reduce the number of people killed by gun violence. When it comes to ghost guns, we know they are produced, purchased, trafficked, and used by individuals who are motivated to be off the grid. So what does that look like? That looks like people who have been blocked from legally purchasing firearms. It looks like people who have maybe been subject to extreme risk protection orders. It looks like youth who might be tech savvy and be able to figure out how to find and buy these things without their parents' notice or print them on a 3D printer. And in this era of mental health challenges that our youth are facing, we don't want that to be happening. In any case, with the advent of 3D printing and internet sales of build, buy, and shoot ghost guns, this is a growing aspect of the epidemic. There has been more than a 1,000% increase in the use of ghost guns in the past 8 years. The ATF confiscated more than 25,000 ghost guns in 2023 alone. And there's another reason to focus on policies to restrict the production, sale, and use of ghost guns. Ghost guns, probably by their nature of how they're manufactured, are particularly associated with non-fatal gun injuries. People shot with ghost guns survive their injuries twice as often as people who are shot by manufactured guns. This is an emerging issue in healthcare because people who survive gun injury often have complicated health care needs, wound care, disabilities, long-term care needs. So there's plenty of reasons to address ghost guns with policy. Finally, I'm going to share the story of a Michigander who will be testifying tomorrow about these weapons, Denise Week. Denise's son was hanging out with his friend who had purchased a ghost gun over the internet. They were both minors. The friend was not allowed to own a gun. Thinking the gun was unloaded, the friend pointed it at Denise's son's head and pulled the trigger. The gun was loaded. He was shot straight through the eye and into the brain. He survived. But now he suffers from debilitating injuries, including partial blindness and seizures. These are the sorts of horrible stories and injuries that I've been referring to, and why I'm proud to partner with my colleague, Representative Foreman, in introducing House Bill 4478 and 4479 to ban these horrible weapons. With that, I hand it over to Representative Foreman.
Thank you, Representative Long John. Good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Morgan Foreman from Washtenaw County, representing District 33, which comprises parts of Ann Arbor, Pittsfield Township, Saline, Lodi, and Bridgewater. The afternoon of November 19th, 2000, I returned home from school as a 6th grader. I was eating my snack in my kitchen, and my uncle and a state trooper knocked on my door. I asked my grandfather, could I open the door? He said, sure. I told him who it was. My uncle and the state trooper informed me that my father had been murdered, shot twice in the back of the head because the coward who murdered him didn't even have the decency to look him in the eyes when he took his life. I stand before you today not just as a legislator, but as someone who's experienced firsthand what it is like to lose a loved one to gun violence. That grief shaped my life, and it fuels my work every day. On my next birthday, I will have outlived my father, and he has been gone longer than I ever had him on my days on this earth. This legislation is personal, and that's why I'm committed to making sure no other family has to carry the kind of loss that mine has. Let's be absolutely and abundantly clear here. No one needs an untraceable ghost gun. These weapons are designed to avoid detection, responsibility, and justice. These are tools for people who intend to do harm and get away with it. That's why we're introducing legislation that says every firearm sold or assembled in the state of Michigan must be serialized and traceable. Here's how it works. If you already own a ghost gun, you'll have 18 months from the effective date to get it serialized. If you're a hobbyist who builds firearms, you'll have 10 days after completion to do the same. Every gun, every part, every single time. Because if a gun is used to harm someone, we should be able to trace it, period. Now let's talk a little bit about what's happening at the federal level. Just a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court affirmed that regulations on ghost guns are constitutional. So we can end this debate right now. This is not a Second Amendment issue. It's a public safety issue. But here's the catch. The federal ban on ghost guns isn't a law. It's an administrative rule from the ATF. That means Michigan law enforcement can't enforce it, and it means any president, any administration can erase it overnight. And that's already happening. Just 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration legalized forced reset triggers, which allows rifles like the AR-15 to fire at the speed of a machine gun. A machine gun. They're legal in America again because of regulatory rollbacks. We'll be introducing legislation on that soon. And I want everyone to know that there is a Senate hearing tomorrow to address it. But here's the bottom line. We cannot rely on the federal government to keep our communities safe. Not with this Supreme Court, not with this administration. We need strong, enforceable Michigan laws that protect Michigan families. Banning ghost guns is one step of many, but it's a critical one, a crucial one. And I'm proud to lead on this work and work with my colleagues in the House and Senate. Because safety is not a partisan issue. Accountability is not optional. And lives, our lives, my life, your life, the life of all Michiganders is not negotiable. Is that clear? So thank you. I'm going to turn this over to M. Perry now from Michigan United to close us out. After that, I and Rep. Longjohn will be back to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Rep. Foreman. My name is Em, and I'm with Michigan United. Michigan United is a statewide power building organization, and we work hard to develop the leadership of our members so we can eradicate the systemic issues such as racial and economic injustice. But I'm not just here because Michigan United supports ending gun violence. I'm here because before I was with Michigan United, I worked at Haven, and I was a first responder and an advocate alongside survivors of intimate partner violence. And I lost two of these survivors that I worked with that I cared deeply about. I lost them to gun violence because two men with access to guns made the choice to murder them. These women were radiant. They were incredible, and they were human beings. They had lives. They had hobbies and interests and pet peeves and love and laughter and families. And now they're gone. They are gone, and their children have to grow up without mothers. I'm also here because I'm a Spartan. I went to Michigan State University, and I lost my fellow Spartans to gun violence. Like Ryan said, we shouldn't have to live like this. And it's going to take more than thoughts and prayers to make the change that we need. It is going to take thoughts and prayers, but also action. And so today we are here to call for hearings on these bills. So much legislation is introduced, but it dies of neglect. 15 states have ghost gun laws. Why not Michigan? 18 states require gun dealers to get a license. Why not Michigan? We can do these things. We just have to have the courage to prioritize the lives of our children and families over the profits of the gun industry. So we're out here building the political will. This event today is just one of many events happening across the state of Michigan. 19 different events so far happening all across the state. We kicked it off with a march in Flint, and we've got marches, we've got rallies, press conferences, resource fairs, and vigils from Detroit to Grand Haven to Saginaw to Oxford. All across our state, people are standing up and declaring that our lives matter more than the gun industry's profits. And you can find a list of all those events. There's a link in the press packet if you want to join any of those events, and you can also look at the End Gun Violence Michigan website. But I want to end by saying that our children matter more than the gun industry's profits. We matter more than the gun industry's profits. And we need our legislators to join that message. Of course, I want to thank Representative Hope, Foreman, and Longjohn for their leadership and what they said today, and for the others that are here as well. We need champions like you. And we call on your colleagues from both sides of the aisle to join you, to stand with us, and to end gun violence. And we'll take questions if you have any.
Do you have any questions?
Will we do like individual interviews?
Afterward, we
Okay,
probably
sounds
can,
good.
but please, if you've got questions, you could ask the group.
So, these bills are being introduced in the House. Have you been working with your Republican colleagues? Is there a chance of these seeing the light of day this session, this term?
That's always a question in divided government, right? So, like I said, I don't believe that these are partisan issues. These are public safety issues. So I am going to work as best as I can with my colleagues in both chambers and on both sides of the aisle. It should go somewhere. House Republicans should take the safety of Michiganders and make that a paramount issue. So it should go somewhere, and I'm going to do the best that I can to push it to make sure that it goes all the way across the finish line. It's my job.
And we've met with dozens of Republican legislators and on this issue, and what many of them said was, well, let's see a bill. And thanks to Representative Foreman and Longjohn and Hope's leadership, we now have bills to show them, and we get to see who puts their name on the dotted line, who's standing with families and children, who's standing with the gun industry.
Thank you, Ryan.
You all had alluded to gun package getting a hearing tomorrow in the Senate Civil Rights Committee. For the serialization bill, how similar is that to Representative McMorrow's?
It's, yeah, so it's the same. Yep, it is the same. I think there's a small difference, but it's actually the same bill. Yeah.
How similar are these to the bills about ghost guns from last term? Is it a reintroduction of those bills?
Essentially, yes.
For Representative Hope, you had mentioned you've been working on this issue for a long time. I believe is this the first time these bills have come? your bill specifically has come up to regulate gun store owners, and I guess why take that step?
Well, a few reasons to take the step. One is that federal enforcement and federal regulations are deficient. And unfortunately, there was an incident in my district in my first before my first term that kind of brought all this to light. A gun was stolen from a firearms dealer and then subsequently used in a domestic violence murder. And because the person who ended up stealing the gun had been renting it, I learned that there's not anything the state can do specifically about that. He was not supposed to have a gun, but he was allowed to rent a gun, and then he stole it under lax supervision. So that's why I specifically became interested in this issue, is because our state laws are lacking as well, and we can't wait for the federal government. I think that's been said by my colleagues a few times now. I mean, before Trump, gun sellers were being inspected once every 10 years, maybe. I can't imagine that it's going to increase under Trump. I mean, that's just an educated guess. What was the first part of your question?
Is this the first time you brought this specific bill forward, or have you done this in past sessions as well?
Well, I'm trying to remember now. It was introduced last session, and it didn't get anywhere. It's been kind of a work in progress too. We're continuing to talk with stakeholders, with advocates like the ones you see in this room, and the state police, who would have a role in enforcing this, and then Laura as well, to make sure that we're not missing any practical aspect that would make this not as effective as we want it to be.
Kind of to that, are there any challenges, roadblocks, areas that need more conversation on these bills? As you said, they were introduced last year under the trifecta, and lame duck aside, they didn't move quickly through the legislature. Are there conversations that still need to be had on these bills to get them where everyone is happy with them?
I might ask Ryan to chime in on this one too, but I believe that we're there. That doesn't mean that we have 100% support, because that would be crazy. Crazy to have 100% support on a gun violence prevention measure. Just, that's the reality. But, people bring up practical concerns. Mostly now that's what we're looking at, and we're working to address them just as quickly and responsibly as we can. One thing that was recently brought up was allowing local law enforcement to enforce this law, and that's something that we're currently in the process of adding. So that would just make more law enforcement professionals capable of enforcing this law, instead of just relying on the state police, who are great, but they're not everywhere.
Rep Hope, you said earlier that the state, under your bill, the state could shut down a retailer that knew or should have known that that purchaser, that buyer, was trying to buy a firearm illegally, or that they weren't allowed to, or they're a straw purchaser, or whatever. So what behavior, what would need to take place in order to qualify under that should have known umbrella? And are there any other penalties, I guess, is there any jail time that would be served besides, any penalty besides being shut down?
This is a regulatory bill, not a criminal bill, so the answer to the last part of your question is no, there wouldn't be jail time. The shutting down comes in the form of losing your license to sell a firearm. And I think I'm forgetting part of your question. I'm sorry.
The first part was, you said if the seller should have known.
Oh, yes.
So what would qualify as they should have known?
They should have known. They should have done a background check. I mean, that's the most basic. Should have known. If I referenced this in my remarks. If someone's questionable regarding their age, if they are coming back over and over again to the same retailer, that should raise some concern. But really, the main point there is the background check.
And it's that last point that Rep. Hope made. There's a relatively small number of gun traffickers, and they go back to the same gun stores over and over again to buy cheap handguns repeatedly. So while it is legal to purchase a handgun if you can pass the background check, it's not legal to traffic them. So it's reasonable for a gun dealer to say, oh, this person's coming in every week to buy handguns. That can't possibly be for personal use. This is likely a trafficker, and we should be alerting law enforcement.
We have time for one more question, and then we can work some individual interviews.
Representative, I know you say you represent the south side of Lansing. That's a side of Southtown where a lot of gun violence happens. How do you think this proposed bill is going to help out with that side of town?
Well, hopefully it'll reduce the number of illegal guns that find their way to South Lansing and anywhere in Michigan. You're right, we have unfortunately seen more than our share of gun violence in South Lansing, often involving young people. And we know that young people don't have their guns legally. So if we can, this is a multifaceted approach to make sure that the wrong people don't end up with firearms. And so if we can stem that tide a little bit, if we can cut that off, we'll see results in the numbers that will show us that there's less gun violence in South Lansing and